Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Andrea, and I want to talk to you about depression today. When I woke up this morning, this was the topic that came into my heart and came into my mind. And with us being in the thick of the holiday season right now and entering into winter, like fully into winter with the solstice being yesterday, there's a lot of you that are dealing with some really, really difficult feelings right now. Difficult feelings, difficult emotions. A lot of you are feeling depressed. And so I want to just talk to you about what depression is, my experience with depression. And when I say what depression is, what I mean is depression from a spiritual and metaphysical sense. My experiences with depression, and I'm going to offer you some tips and guidance, things that you can start incorporating into your life today to move you out of the depressive episode that you might be in right now, or for you to keep in your back pocket for future experiences where you might be experiencing depression. First and foremost, I want to give a disclaimer. Obviously, I'm not a doctor or a medical professional, and nothing that I say in this video is to be taken or misconstrued as medical advice. If you are someone who feels like pharmaceuticals and medications and things of that nature are important to you and your journey and your healing, then I fully encourage you to do whatever you feel is best for you. This is for people who are experiencing, have experienced, or may potentially experience depression that are looking for a more holistic or spiritual lens for engaging with this shift in their internal environment. Okay? So just want to make that very, very clear. So the first time I started experiencing depression, I honestly don't even know how old I was. I was definitely a child the first time I started experiencing feelings and sensations in my body that could be characterized as depression. But when I was in my mid-teens, around 14 or 15 years old, I was very clear that I was depressed. And my awareness of depression at that time was that it was a chemical imbalance in the brain. That's what, I don't know if doctors are still calling it a chemical imbalance, but I know that's the perception that a lot of people still hold as it relates to depression. And that's exactly what I felt as well. And I was depressed for a lot of different reasons. Number one, just being a teenager is hard. Being a teen girl is very hard. But I also had a very difficult and traumatic childhood. I was raised in a very volatile environment. There was a lot of violence in my home environment as a child. I was physically abused by my mom. I was emotionally abused, financially abused. I grew up in a household where there was hitting, and I would get, beat with belts and other objects. And, my mom was very angry, very stressed out. She was a single mom after my parents divorced, and she didn't really have an outlet for a lot of the rage and anger that she was feeling because of her circumstances. And unfortunately, a lot of that rage and anger was directed towards her children. And through that, plus contending with the fact that I had an absentee father, my father was a drug addict. He sold drugs. He was a criminal for all intents and purposes. He committed a lot of crimes, and he spent a significant chunk of my childhood in prison. And so there were many years when the only time I saw my dad was behind, a glass window pane where I would talk to him over the phone when we would go to see him in jail. And so those are just a few little tidbits about how I grew up and the environment I was raised in to give you some context to what created the depression that I experienced as a child and as a teenager. And when I was a teenager and I was feeling depressed, I was very self-isolating. I slept a lot, spent a lot of time alone, needed a lot of time alone, was very angry. And I also experienced very, very intense suicide ideation when I was a teenager. And so I have a great deal of experience with depression and the very intense and painful and almost debilitating emotions and physiological responses that come from being in that state. And so what started happening for me was, as I got older, I still experienced a lot of depression throughout my 20s, going into my late 20s. But when I started working with spiritual teachers and started doing my own practices and really training myself to shift and reorient my thinking and my consciousness around my own life, then I started having fewer and fewer experiences with depressive states or depressive episodes. And one of the things that really clicked for me was when I worked with a teacher several years ago who would talk about depression, and she would talk about anxiety as a lack of presence. It's about not being in your body, not being in the present moment. She would sometimes say that depression is living in the past, whereas anxiety is living in the future. And I remember that really resonated with me because depression, for me, or in my experience with depression, and maybe this is something that you can relate to as well, so much of what creates that depression or those depressive states is the discomfort or the frustration or the grief around the things that have happened to us, the things that have occurred. Constantly replaying negative experiences in my childhood of getting hit or getting yelled at or getting punished in disproportionate ways. My father being a drug addict, my father dying of an overdose from drugs. All of these things that, were occurrences in my life that were very, very deeply painful that I spent so much energy focusing on and wanting my life to be different than what my life was at that time. Just wanting to be anywhere else than where I was, because where I was, or where I felt like I was hell. It was a place that I wanted to escape. It was a place that I didn't want to be because it was the source of all of my suffering. Being in my home environment and being a dependent and not having financial resources or the ability to provide for myself or care for myself, and feeling trapped in that environment that I couldn't leave, that I couldn't escape. And so I spent a lot of time, like I said, isolating. I spent a lot of time alone, a lot of time in books and journaling and listening to music and daydreaming. So much of my late adolescence was spent in the dream world of me just thinking about what was coming in my future, what I was living for, what my goals and dreams were, my dreams and aspirations were, which for me was moving to New York. I knew from a very, very young age that I wanted to be an actress. And my vision was always to move to New York City after I graduated from high school. And so that vision of me living in New York City and living up my dream, going on auditions, becoming an actress, being on TV sets and film sets, that was what anchored and really held me, in those moments where I felt like I wanted to end my life, and made some very not fully serious attempts, but got close to making some attempts at ending my life. And so holding that vision of New York and just knowing I only have 4 more years left until I graduate. There's only 3 more years left until I graduate. There's only 2 more years left until I graduate. There's 1 more year left until I graduate. That was what I held on to, knowing that what I was experiencing in that moment was temporary. And I think that insight and that little nugget of wisdom that I held at that moment, or in those moments, is what kept me going. And I think that's something that a lot of people who experience depression struggle with, is not recognizing that what they're going through is a temporary sensation or a temporary experience that they're having. And this is one of the reasons why I struggle with the medical approach to depression, because it treats it like a permanent, blight on your consciousness, or a permanent affliction that you will never be able to get rid of. It's a chemical imbalance, and there's nothing that you can do about it except take this pill. And that's something that I don't agree with. Again, it's not to say that if this is what feels right for you, that you shouldn't do that. I'm not telling you not to go that route or to believe these things. But for me and for the people who are watching this video for an alternative perspective, that's what this is for. And I just don't agree with the idea that anything that we experience or are going through as humans is incurable or insurmountable. The human body, the human mind, the psyche, our consciousness, our auric fields, everything is reparable. Everything within our being is always craving homeostasis and restoration, and our body is constantly healing itself or seeking out ways to heal. And depression comes about when we're in an environment, or we're in a mental state where we are no longer aligned with what it is that we are experiencing, but we feel powerless to change it. And that is the core that a lot of people are experiencing in terms of why they are so depressed, is because they are no longer attuned to their environment, the frequency of their environment, whether it's you living at home or being in a certain school, or the people that you're surrounded with, the things that you're taking in consciously and subconsciously. You're no longer energetically attuned to that, but you don't feel like you're in a space where you can shift out of that environment or shift out of that circumstance. And that feeling of powerlessness, plus the constant fixation on the past events that you've experienced, is what creates this feeling and this experience of being depressed, of having low energy, not wanting to do things, not wanting to talk to people, not even wanting to care for yourself. And at the worst, the worst expression of this is not wanting to be alive. But what it really, that's that feeling of not wanting to be alive is more so connected to no longer wanting to be the version of yourself that's having the experience that it is that you're having, and no longer wanting to have that experience. And so when we think about, wanting to like take ourselves off the planet or unalive, as we have to say on the internet streets these days, which really frustrates me, but I digress. This comes from no longer being attuned to this facade that you're putting on, or this version of yourself. There's an interesting quote that I heard years ago from Jim Carrey that I'm going to read, that where he kind of speaks on this a little bit. And he essentially says, and this is regardless of your opinions of Jim Carrey, I'm not speaking about his character, I'm just talking about the quote. And it resonated a lot with me when I first heard it. But he said, depression is your mind telling you it's tired of being the character you're trying to play. And so a lot of people will experience depression when they're still holding thoughts and ideas about themselves, or beliefs that they have often been indoctrinated with, or that have been imposed on them, that are just no longer congruent with who they are actually designed to be. And your stagnancy of staying in that character, or staying in that facade, or staying in that false self, is what creates that feeling of depression. Depression can also come about when you are showing up. And to, let me rewind a little bit. So this character that I'm talking about that you no longer want to play, the way that this can be expressed, and this is something that I've been talking a lot in my work, is like the archetypes of the people pleasers and the overgivers, or, people who are experiencing a lot of abuse in their lives, or they're feeling a lot of, they're not experiencing reciprocity with people in their environment. And it's because you're showing up as a version of yourself that is not sustainable. You cannot sustain being a people pleaser. You cannot sustain being someone who is constantly over giving your energy without giving anything back. And the incongruence that is created from you being this false version of yourself is what creates this depressive state. And depression and all of the behaviors and even thoughts that come up from being depressed are signals to you that it's time to create a shift. It's time to move into a new space. But going back to what I was saying before, is that a lot of people, when they're in that state of mind, when they're in that space or in that experience, they feel powerless to change their circumstances. And so like me as a teenager, I felt powerless to change my circumstances. And so I anchored into the vision of my future in order for me to survive the circumstances that I was living through in that moment. And so when I talk about, the cure for depression is simpler than you think, for me, the cure, and this is also something that I was taught by that same teacher who talked about depression being a lack of presence, is for me, the cure, or the portal out of depression, is gratitude. It's gratitude. And I know that it can be very challenging for people to hear gratitude, because they don't feel like there's anything for them to be grateful for when they're in that when they're in that space, when they're in that state of mind. And something that my teacher would say is, gratitude is the rope that pulls you out of the quicksand of your mind. And so if you can find something to be grateful for what that does is that creates expansion, because depression is contraction. It's when you close in on yourself. It's judgment of of the self. It's rejection of the self in that present moment. It's rejection of the environment, the self, and all of the circumstances of that present moment. But when you can anchor into gratitude, even if it's something as simple as, I am so grateful that I got up and brushed my teeth today. If that was the only thing that you were able to do, leaning into the gratitude for that creates opening, it creates expansion, it creates it creates more opening of possibility. Because that's the thing when you're depressed, is you don't see an out, you don't see a doorway into another path. All you see is darkness, and you see all of the terrible things that have happened to you, or how badly you feel in your body, or how powerless you're feeling because of the structures of society. But that gratitude is what opens your heart, and it creates receptivity, because you can't call in new experiences. You can't create and manifest new experiences and new realities for yourself if you're not in a state of receptivity. And this is why I say that gratitude is the cure for depression, because it pulls you out of that contracted state and it gets you into a space of openness and receptivity, so that you are now able to conceptualize possibilities for yourself outside of what it is that you've experienced in the past that you're harping on in the present moment. And so the gratitude of, I'm so grateful that I brushed my teeth today, pulls you into the present moment. And instead of, God, I hate that, my mom talks to me like this, or I hate that I didn't get into the college that I wanted, or that my partner doesn't show up for me the way that I need them to, or whatever it is that you're going through right now that is creating that contraction of depression. Finding more and more things every single day for you to be grateful for is what is going to create that openness for you. So if you are a teenager watching this right now, and I'm saying this because I remember being a 15-year-old who hated my life and wanted to die. And I remember my bedroom being my sanctuary. It was my private space. It was the one thing that belonged to me in the world, even though it still had my privacy violated sometimes. My mom would bust in my room, or my sisters, or things like that. It was still my space. It was still my sanctuary. And so maybe you're a teenager and you have a couple of years before you're graduating from high school, and you hate your home environment, but you have a bedroom that you can go to, every single day, and you're left alone for a couple of hours a day, or whatever that is. Finding gratitude for that, for the fact that you have a sanctuary where you can lay down and you can put on your headphones and just dive into and immerse yourself in a new world through music, or an audiobook, or a paper book, or whatever it is that is anchoring you into a space of gratitude, so that you are still open and receptive to all of the possibilities that are still available to you. Because that's the most depressing thing about depression, is that it shuts you off from what's possible for you, because you're so focused on the past, or you're so focused on what it is about your circumstance that you can't change. So instead of pulling your energy into focusing on the things that you cannot change about your circumstances, put your energy on the things that you're grateful for and the things that you can change. Maybe you don't love the energy that's in your home, but you can go outside and you can take a walk, and you can put your feet in the bare earth, and you can be thankful for the grounding that's available to you, and for nature, and how nature is able to receive a lot of the painful energy and emotions that are currently circulating through your body. Be grateful for the fact that you can go into your backyard and put your hand on a tree, and that it can take some of that energy out of your body. Thinking about the possibilities that are available to you is such a beautiful way to combat that dark cloud that can take over when you're in those depressive states of mind. The other trick, aside from coming into that space of gratitude, is to be very conscious and very aware of what it is that you're consuming. Because what we consume also consumes us. And so a lot of people are feeling really depressed simply because of what they're watching on their phone and what they're watching on TV or what they're listening to, the things that they're taking in their environment. You know, there's such an onslaught of very depressing topics and very depressing events happening in the world that if you're on your phone and you're constantly seeing and feeling and receiving the energy from the content that is on social media, on the internet, on television, that's another thing that can send you into a really, really deep downward spiral. And you see it all the time on social media. You see it in the comments. You see it in the types of things that people are creating and the rage bait and the way that people are responding to things that you might say or how people are contextualizing the world. Like something I'm hearing a lot right now is the world is on fire. The world is on fire. And people think that the world is on fire because of what it is that they're consuming. And you thinking that the world is on fire and that there's no way out of the mess that you're perceiving is what creates that sense of powerlessness that I've been talking about, that you can't change what's going on, both internally and externally in the world. And so be very conscious about what it is that you're consuming. If you're feeling depressed, if you are feeling like hopeless about the state of your life or the state of the world, then really sit down and take an inventory of what is it that you're watching? What is it that you're listening to? What's being spoken about on the podcast? What's being spoken about in your feed? Maybe this is the time to go through and do a purge of some of the accounts that you're listening to or what you're subscribed to on YouTube, and start focusing your energy on things that are rooted in gratitude and hopefulness versus hopelessness, and start shifting your mind state out of this idea that everything in this world has gone to shit, because everything in this world hasn't gone to shit. There are a lot of terrible things that are happening in the world, but there have almost always been a lot of things that are terrible things that are happening in the world. And at the same time, there is so much beauty in the world. There's so much generosity and gratitude and unconditional love and playfulness and joy that's also existing in the world. There's so much beauty everywhere you look. There's beauty to be found. Sometimes it's as simple as just looking out your window and seeing the shifting of the seasons, seeing the beautiful golden colors and red colors and oranges of the leaves that used to be green just several weeks ago, and anchoring into the beauty and the gratitude for the ability for things to shift and evolve and grow. And so consumption is such an important part of moving yourself out of that space. And consumption isn't just, I'm not just talking about consuming social media, consuming literal consumption. What is it that you're eating? What are you taking into your body? What are you consuming with your mouth? There's so many processed, harmful, chemically laden foods that are being pushed on the masses right now. And so many of these things are contributing to the feeling of depression, because what a lot of people don't recognize is that your gut is considered a second brain. You have brain cells and consciousness in your gut. And whatever you're eating and whatever it is that you're digesting is then being, dispersed throughout your body, and it's being processed through your body, being processed through your blood. And it's also what is fueling your brain. So if you are fueling your body and your brain and your consciousness with processed sugars and toxic chemicals and food dyes and all of these things, and in my opinion also, and this is something I haven't spoken much about this here on YouTube, but I've talked about this on my Instagram, consuming animals is a big contributor to depression, in my opinion, because you're consuming the dead flesh of depressed, murdered, raped animals. Like, these animals are in states of despondency and depression and fear, and then that flesh is being imbued with those energies, it's being imbued with those emotions, and then you are consuming that. You're taking that into your body and then wondering why you feel trapped, wondering why you feel depressed, wondering why you feel angry, wondering why you feel hopeless, because a lot of the energy that you're consuming in your food is rooted in hopelessness and depression and fear. And so I just want you to start considering some of these, elements of how you're living your life and how it can be contributing to the lack of balance that you're feeling in your moods and in your emotional state. And so for me, like I said, going back to gratitude has been such an important part of the process for me, because even, these last few years, I've gone through a lot, and I've been talking about this in my videos, where I have had to have massive identity shifts. Just like the quote that I read of Jim Carrey, like my mind telling me that I'm tired of pretending to be this character that I'm playing. Like I'm no longer this old archetype of myself, this old persona of myself. That part of myself no longer wants to exist. It wants to be laid to rest, but I was still holding on to it. And by me holding on to the part of me that needed to be laid to rest, I was keeping myself in a depressive state, because it was creating that contraction that wasn't allowing me to expand into the next fuller version of who I'm designed to be. And it hit its peak for me around spring of 2024, where I fell into a deep depression. And it was my first time feeling depressed in many years. And I even had thoughts of suicide ideation. And thankfully, when those thoughts started to come up in my mind, it came up during a time where I have tools, and I have learned to regulate my nervous system and how to manage all of the different feelings and emotions that pop up for me, and how to face that pain head on. And I actually have a video that at the end, when I put the subscribe and the video suggested video, I'm gonna make sure it's this video. It's the title is something like "Pain Serves a Powerful Purpose." And I understand how to interact with pain. Whereas as a teenager, I didn't know how to interact with pain. I didn't understand that pain was a gift that was helping me recognize what's no longer aligned for me. And so even though the depression came up again, and even those thoughts came up, I got to observe those thoughts from a place of objectivity versus observing those thoughts from a place of, this is all that's available to me. This is my only option. This is the only thing that's going to make me feel better. I got to observe those thoughts, and I got to sit with my inner teenager and let my inner teenager cry, and let my inner teenager express the latent and unprocessed grief that's still living within me, because that's who was coming to the surface to be seen and witnessed in that moment where I was having those thoughts again. And thankfully, I have the tools, and I teach my clients the tools to navigate those really painful and difficult emotions. But when those thoughts came up, I was able to not only navigate through them, but I was able to anchor into, what am I grateful for? Like, yes, things are so hard right now. I'm not making any money. I'm feeling disconnected from my purpose. I'm feeling like everything is really hard. I'm grieving my career as an actress. I don't know what I'm doing. Everything that I'm trying doesn't seem to be working. I'm having so many difficulties. What am I grateful for? What am I grateful for right now? Because when I start spiraling like that, it reminds me that there's so much for me to be grateful for in my life. And I'm not anchored into gratitude. I'm anchored into the victim mentality of everything that happened to me before, and feeling powerless to change my circumstances. And I know that I'm not powerless to change my circumstances, the same way I know that you were not powerless to change your circumstances. And so coming back into that gratitude of, I have so many friends that are here to support me. I have this beautiful bus that I built to be my sanctuary that I can take wherever I want. So if I'm feeling lonely, all I have to do is just drive to wherever my friends are, and I can spend time with them. Or if I want to go and camp by a river for a few days, I can just drive to a river. I can drive up into the mountains. I can drive into the forest. I had so many things going for me to be grateful for that brought me out of that space and back into presence of, I am a queen, I am a goddess, I am a sovereign woman who is not a victim and who has the power to shift the trajectory of my life. And so, I just want to repeat again, when you are depressed, you are not seeing the possibility, you're not seeing the forest for the trees. But when you anchor into gratitude, even if it's just, like I said, I am so grateful that I got up and brushed my teeth today. I am so grateful that I made myself a nourishing breakfast today. And then from that place, not only am I so grateful that I made myself a nourishing breakfast, I'm so grateful that I have these nourishing organic ingredients. Grateful that I have the income to go to the store and buy food to feed myself. I am so grateful for the hands that planted the seeds of these fruits and vegetables. I am so grateful for the hands that harvested these fruits and vegetables. Like, the more you think about what you're grateful for, the more you realize that there's even more for you to be grateful for. Even if it just starts with that one little thing of, I'm so grateful for this bowl of oatmeal. Where did those oats come from? Who picked those oats? Being grateful for the fact that when I went into the store, everything that I needed was on the shelves and available for me. How grateful am I that I live in a world where I can think that I need something for a recipe and I can drive 5 minutes and I can go pick it up and nourish myself. Find ways in your day-to-day life to be grateful, and that is going to be the key, the portal that pulls you out of the depressive state that you're in. And I know that some of you guys are going through really, really challenging circumstances. Some of you are going through and living through what feels like hell right now. And this is one of the reasons why I told you a little bit about my childhood and some of the things that I have survived and the hell that I have lived through, because even from that place, no matter how dark it gets, you can come back into the light. Watch my video that I posted yesterday about the winter solstice, because the winter solstice marks the darkest night of the year. And some of us are in a dark night of the soul. We're in this transitional period where it feels like everything around us is shrouded in blackness and in darkness, and it feels insurmountable, and it feels scary, and it feels depressing. But remembering that the deeper you go into the darkness, the brighter the light gets to be on the other side, is what always anchors me back into the present moment. It's what I teach my clients, and it's what I wanted to share with you today. So if you're struggling with feeling depressed, especially as we're in the holidays, or you've experienced depression in the past and you're afraid that it might come back, or you potentially could go through something in the future that brings about depression, I want you to remember that depression is temporary. It's not a signal that you are broken. It's just a signal that the version of yourself that you've been living needs to be laid to rest, so that the version of you that you are becoming can step into his or her fullness. And so I say this with so much love for you, that you can do this. I believe in you, and I'm sending you so much love, because I know exactly how you feel, or how you have felt, or how you will feel. And I'm holding you with so much tenderness in my heart and so much resonance, because I recognize what it is that you're going through and where you are in this moment. And if you can find something to be grateful for, then that's what's going to pull you back into the present, so that you can see the gift of possibilities that lie ahead of you. Let me know in the comments how this video landed for you, how you're feeling after listening to this, or if you just want to share some of the things that you've been moving through, or some of your tips for moving through depression for anybody else that watches this video and reads the comments. I would really be so grateful for you to do that. And if you're looking for some one-on-one guidance and you want to work with me, I'll drop a link in the comments for my spiritual alignment session, so that you can drop in with me one-on-one and we can talk about some of the things that you're moving through and what you're navigating. And I can help you shift out of the mentality of hopelessness and despondency and depression and powerlessness, and shift you into a place where you're feeling powerful and feeling sovereign and hopeful and excited about all of the possibilities that exist and lie in wait for you to claim them as your own. Have a beautiful day wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for being here and for watching. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more, please engage by liking, commenting, or giving me a subscription, so that I know that you want to see more of my content. Sending you love. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.